The story begins at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where a professor named Gerald Lambeau is teaching mathematics. At the end of his lecture, he tells his graduate students that he will write a very tough math problem on the board outside the class, and whoever solves it will have their name written on the T-Tech. He motivates them further by saying that in the past, top mathematicians were among those who solved it. Because of how hard it is, Gerald gives them until the end of the semester to figure it out. The lecture ends and we see Will Hunting, who works as a janitor at MIT, looking at the math problem written by Gerald. Later at home, Will tries solving the problem on his bathroom mirror. The next day, when he's alone in the hallway, he picks up chalk and writes the answer to the equation on the board. Outside of work, Will spends his time drinking and hanging out with his friends Chucky, Billy, and Morgan. One day while watching a kid's baseball game, Will spots a man who used to bully him in school. Later, he and his friends go after that guy and start a fight. In the end, Will beats his old bully badly. His friends pull him back, but when the police arrive, Will lashes out at an officer, which leads to him getting arrested. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald is informed by his students that the math problem has been solved. He rushes to check and sees that someone really cracked it. He asks his students if they are the ones who did it, but none of them admit it, which leaves him puzzled. In his next class, the room is packed with students eager to find out who the mystery genius is. Gerald asks the solver to step forward and claim the prize, but the class stays silent as everyone looks around. Since no one comes forward, Gerald announces a new challenge by writing another problem on the board, one that had taken him 2 years to solve. Will gets out of jail and soon starts working on that problem. At the same time, Gerald steps out of his office and sees Will writing on the board. Thinking Will is vandalizing it, Gerald moves toward him, but Will quickly runs away. Later, Gerald walks back and realizes that Will had actually solved the problem that took him 2 years. Now he knows who the unknown math genius really is. After work, Will meets his friends at a bar for drinks. Chucky notices 2 attractive women and goes over to flirt. To impress them, he claims he is in the same class as they are. A man interrupts and asks which class exactly. Chucky says history, but the man who attends that class with the girls knows Chucky is lying. He tries to embarrass him by asking a history-related question. Chucky stays quiet, so Will steps in. He debates the man by sharing facts and ideas. The man tries to counter, but Will cuts him off and finishes his sentence, showing he had memorized a passage from a book. Will mocks him for spending thousands on education that he could have learned for free at a public library. Embarrassed, the man walks away. Later, one of the girls named Skylar approaches Will and gives him her phone number. Impressed by his intelligence, she asks him to call her so they can go out for drinks sometime. Will later shows that number to the man who had tried to act smart. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald keeps searching for the janitor who solved his tough math problems. After asking around, he finally manages to get contact information for Will. He shows up at Will's court hearing for assaulting a police officer. Will tries to defend himself, but the judge points out that he has a long record of petty theft and fights. The judge says he cannot ignore Will's past actions and sentences him to jail with bail set at $50,000. Will ends up in prison where Professor Gerald visits him with a deal. He tells Will that he spoke to the judge and can arrange for him to be pardoned, but only if Will accepts 2 conditions. The first is that he studies mathematics with Gerald. The second is that he goes to counseling. Will laughs at the idea of seeing a therapist, but since he wants to avoid jail, he agrees. He begins taking math classes with Gerald, who is amazed by his intelligence. Then, Will starts meeting different therapists, but he refuses to open up. He even reads their books beforehand and mocks them during sessions. As a last attempt, Gerald turns to his old friend Sean Maguire, who now teaches psychology at a community college. At first, Sean says he does not have the time, but Gerald insists, telling him that Will is a genius and his counseling could help shape his life. Sean eventually agrees and meets Will. In their first session, Sean asks Gerald and his assistant to leave the room. Just like before, Will tries to mock the therapist by commenting on Sean's books. Sean recognizes this as a defense tactic and stays calm, talking normally, without prying into Will's life. Will then notices a painting made by Sean. Using quotes from art books, he makes wrong assumptions about Sean's life. Sean ignores the insults until Will brings up his wife. At that point, Sean gets irritated. Will keeps pressing about her, asking if she cheated on him. This pushes Sean over the edge, and he grabs Will by the throat, warning him never to disrespect his wife again. Will simply says the session is over and leaves, thinking he has broken another therapist. Gerald assumes Sean will refuse to see Will again, but to his surprise, Sean asks to continue the sessions the following week. Outside of therapy, Will goes on a date with Skylar. During their time together, he learns that she comes from a wealthy family and studies at Harvard. They connect quickly, enjoy each other's company, and end their first date with a kiss. The next week, Will shows up at Sean's office where Sean tells him to follow him outside. Sean takes Will to a park and talks to him. He says he thought a lot about what Will said about his painting and realized that Will is just a kid who does not know what he is talking about. Sean explains that just like Will cannot judge
judge someone's life by reading a few art books, he himself cannot truly understand Will's problems just by having a degree in psychology. Sean tells him that he knows Will avoids speaking because he is afraid of what he might reveal, but if he never opens up, he will miss out on the best parts of life. Will returns to his routine where Chucky picks him up and drives him to their job at a construction site. He also calls Skylar but struggles to talk to her. At his third therapy session with Sean, Will does not say a single word, and Sean stays silent as well. The fourth session begins the same way until Will, out of boredom, cracks a joke. Sean takes this chance and asks if Will has a girlfriend. Will tells him about Skylar and admits he has not spoken to her since their first date. When Sean asks why, Will says that Skylar feels too good for him and that if they keep seeing each other, he will only ruin it. Sean tells him that nobody is too perfect and everyone has flaws, but what matters is whether that person is right for you. To make his point clearer, Sean shares that his wife, who was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, used to fart in her sleep. This breaks the tension and both of them burst into laughter. That moment brings them closer and Will starts to feel more at ease with Sean. The session ends with Sean advising him not to worry about Skylar being too good for him, but instead to think if they would be happy together. Will is so caught up in those words that he does not realize the session is already over until Sean reminds him. Encouraged by Sean, Will goes to Skylar's dorm and asks her out again. Skylar says yes, but explains she has a tough problem to solve that could take hours or days. Will cannot wait, so he solves it quickly on a napkin and hands it to her. With that done, they head out on their second date. During the date, Skylar asks about his family and Will lies by saying he has 12 brothers. She asks him to name them all and he lists 12 random names. Suspicious, she asks him to repeat them and he does so in the same order, showing off his memory.
In the next therapy session, Will asks Sean if he has ever regretted meeting his wife, since her death left him in so much pain. Sean answers by telling the story of how they met. He explains that he first saw her while waiting in line with friends for tickets to a legendary baseball game. Will gets excited thinking Sean witnessed it live. Sean recalls all the key moments of the game, but then reveals he actually watched it later on TV because he left the line to go on a date with the woman who became his wife. Will cannot believe Sean skipped such a historic game just to spend time with a girl. Sean answers that he never regretted missing that game, and he certainly never regretted meeting his wife, even though their time together was short. Later, Skylar asks Will to introduce her to his friends and family. Will is still lying about his background, but he agrees to take her to meet his friends. Skylar joins them at a bar and enjoys their company, sharing laughs and jokes with everyone. Meanwhile, Gerald asks Sean about Will's progress. Sean says Will has slowly started to open up, but will need more time before he is ready to talk about his past and why he struggles to trust people. Gerald then reveals that he has been setting up job interviews for Will at top mathematics institutes and believes that once his issues are resolved, nothing will stop him from making a name for himself in the field. Sean disagrees, saying they should not decide Will's future for him, but instead support whatever he chooses to do. Gerald insists he will not let Will's talent go to waste. Will has no interest in those job offers, so he sends Chucky to the interview in his place. One night, while talking about life, Skylar asks Will to move to California with her. Hearing this, Will starts to panic and says he cannot go with her. Skylar asks why he is afraid to commit and why he keeps lying about his past. She brings up the story of him having 12 brothers.
Called out as a liar, Will finally loses control. He admits that he grew up as an orphan, moving from one foster home to another. He reveals that he was abused and beaten by one of his foster fathers. Skylar begins to cry and tells him she wants to stay by his side and help him, but Will pushes her away, saying he does not need anyone. It becomes clear that he fears abandonment and believes anyone he loves will eventually leave. Skylar cries that she truly loves him and will never leave, but Will lies that he does not love her back and walks away, leaving her in tears. After pressure from Gerald, Will agrees to go to a job interview. He shows up but makes no effort to get hired. Later in therapy, Sean asks him who he trusts most. Will answers Chucky. Sean says that while Chucky would give his life for him, he will never understand his deeper struggles. Sean then asks how he plans to earn a living. Will says he will just keep working construction in Boston for the rest of his life. Sean tells him that he's afraid of leaving his comfort zone, and that fear will keep him from living his best life. Sean makes it clear he will not force Will to take a job Gerald arranged. Instead, he asks Will what he really wants to do. Will jokes that he wants to be a shepherd. Realizing Will is not serious, Sean tells him to leave, since he does not want to waste his time with someone who is not honest. Will gets angry and starts yelling. Sean calmly repeats the question of what he truly wants to do. Will stays silent, so Sean sends him away. Before Skylar leaves for California, Will calls her to say goodbye. Skylar, still hoping to mend things, tells him that she loves him. Will smiles, but cannot say it back because he is terrified of getting his heart broken. Later, Will tells Chucky that he broke up with Skylar and has no plans for a real job. He says he wants to stay in Boston forever, working construction and living next door to Chucky. Chucky then gets brutally honest with him. He says it hurts to see Will throw away his life when he has so much potential. Chucky admits that every morning when he comes to pick Will up, he secretly hopes that Will is not there. He wishes Will would leave this small life behind and finally do something meaningful.
Meanwhile, Gerald argues with Sean about Will. Gerald complains that Sean has not convinced him to take a job and use his intelligence to achieve something great. Sean pushes back, saying they cannot force Will into big life decisions when he is not ready. He explains that Will's fear of abandonment makes him push people away before they can get too close. Sean insists they should support Will in whatever he chooses rather than pushing him into a career he may end up hating. But Professor Gerald disagrees with him. He warns Sean not to let Will think it is okay to waste his intelligence and live like a failure. Their different views turn into a heated argument where Gerald accuses Sean of being jealous of his success. Sean tells him that he is not a failure because he never wanted to live like him. At that moment, Will walks in and overhears their conversation. Gerald leaves the room to let the therapy session begin. Sean has a file with pictures of Will's bruised body from the beatings of his foster father. Will asks if he has ever seen something like that before. Sean then shares that his own father was an alcoholic who used to beat him and his mother when he was a kid. Hearing this, Will remembers his foster father. Sean steps in front of Will and tells him that none of it was his fault. Will nods, but Sean repeats it again. Will says he knows, but Sean keeps saying that Will was never at fault for what happened. Will starts crying and pushes Sean away. Sean once more tells him that the abuse he faced was not his fault. Will finally breaks down and hugs Sean tightly while crying his heart out. He is now ready to let go of his past and move forward. He tells Sean that he will take one of the jobs Gerald found for him. This marks his final therapy session. Will asks if he can keep in touch. Sean says he will always be there for him and tells him to follow his heart. Will hugs him and says a final goodbye. For his 21st birthday, Chucky, Billy, and Morgan give Will a car. It is not brand new, but he is happy because it came from his best friends. Meanwhile, Gerald goes to Sean and apologizes for his harsh words. They reconcile as friends and Sean shares that he is leaving on a world tour. While Sean packs his bags, Will drives up to his house and quietly slips a letter into his mailbox before leaving. Later, Chucky comes to pick Will up, but finds the house empty. He peeks through the window and sees Will is gone. He smiles, knowing his friend has finally chosen his own path. Sean finds the letter and reads that Will is not taking the job. Instead, he is heading to California to reunite with Skylar. Sean smiles and goes back inside. The movie ends with Will driving off to meet Skylar. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more movie recaps.